Nicoloc, serving Long Island for 50 years. Nicoloc is proud to be a part of the fight against breast cancer.
Welcome to the New York Cancer and Blood Specialists Radio for a Cure speaker series. My name is Anna Zapp from the Anna and Raven Show on Walk 97.5. Today's discussion is breast cancer in the time of COVID, presented by Nicoloc Paving Stones. Nicoloc is a longtime Long Island company that has transformed homes, and they are dedicated to supporting our communities. We're thankful for their support and dedication to help raise awareness about breast cancer on Long Island, and proud to call them part of Radio for a Cure. And I know that a lot of the focus of today's discussion is about breast cancer, but I expect and I hope that the information we share today will transcend beyond that and help provide insight for all people dealing with a life-changing disease. I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Yelda Nori, New York Cancer and Blood Specialist, oncologist and hematologist, and lead medical oncologist with the Fortunato Breast Center, Jerry Barish, Executive Director of Hewlett House, and Nancy Viteretti, Director of the New York Cancer Foundation. These are one of the smartest people on the front lines helping patients every single day. Now, I know this discussion is going to be insightful for anybody trying to navigate treatment during a pandemic. But what we're trying to figure out today is, once you have a diagnosis, should you get a vaccine? What seniors should be mindful of? There's a lot to cover, so we're going to jump right into it. And I'd like to start with you, Dr. Nori. When you're first diagnosed with breast cancer, or you've been going through treatment and you find out the world is basically going to shut down like it did in March of 2020, how did things change? How did the treatments change for all these people that are going through this diagnosis?
Thank you so much, Anna, for bringing this to our attention, because this is such an important discussion. So the COVID pandemic was a very unique time for all of medicine, and especially oncology. So nothing I did in my training would have prepared me for a global pandemic that would basically shut down operating rooms and close down, hospitals to elective surgeries. I think one of the most important things I learned is how adaptable oncologists really are. We're pretty crafty. So we went from offering patients biopsies, followed by surgery, and then systemic therapy. We modified our approach, and for a lot of women, what we did was we initiated things like endocrine therapy and chemotherapy prior to surgery, which is something we don't typically do. And in fact, there was a publication from our governing body called ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and several publications in very reputable scientific journals showed that while the number of patients diagnosed with breast cancer between January of 2020 and May of 2020 decreased, what we saw was an uptick in the number of women who received preoperative therapy, including chemotherapy and endocrine therapy. So we shifted the paradigms, and we initiated things like endocrine therapy, like drugs like tamoxifen or Arimidex, or opted to treat women with upfront chemotherapy, and in an effort to prevent the cancer from growing and then doing surgery later on. So we became crafty, adaptable, and changed the way we treated patients.
Jerry, how about you? How was it at the beginning of the pandemic? What changes did you see?
First, I just have to say that to me, my oncologist said so many of the things that the doctor just said, and it changed so many things. But one of the things that we preach, if you were already diagnosed with cancer and waiting for biopsies, so on and so forth, the one thing we always said is you've got to not make decisions on your own. You've got to talk to your oncologist. I mean, it is so important. That's the person who knows. They know what's happening. They could look a little beyond this crazy pandemic, and you need to know your history and what your situation is. Finally, we have the tools, but you need to have that conversation with your oncologist. And for those that were afraid, some of those people, we were able to, luckily, even though the HIPAA laws are so strong and we would certainly go by them, we said, we'll be happy to sit with you if it's okay with you and your oncologist, for fear of being alone and not having that conversation. And so that was the first thing that we did. lots of people, yes, were so afraid. They were told, we're going to do some treatments on you first, shrink the tumor, get started because of the pandemic and what was happening. And some were okay with that, some weren't. I think the more good information that they were given and the support was so important. The education that we always push is know who you are, where you came from, know your history, know what your situation is. And so it kind of gives them an avenue into, well, there is cancer in my family, there's hormonal cancer in my family. I need to take care of this. And a lot of those things have come from our oncologists. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the doctor-patient relationship and having the confidence. If you don't, okay, that's another situation. But you can, during a pandemic, second guess yourself and not really say, I'll do it later, because there is no later. We have to take care of it now. And I will tell you, as a 5-time cancer survivor, that I know that without having the faith and trust in your doctors and being able to reach them and ask those questions, that is so important to get you through to the next step.
Nancy, your perspective.
So from the financial side of helping patients who were undergoing treatment during COVID and really struggling with the day-to-day expenses, some of the big changes that we saw were in the types of needs that patients had, which was literally putting food on the tables for their families. And also extremely importantly, as Jerry and Dr. Nori just said, is patients actually getting to their treatments. We found a lot of patients did not want to utilize public transportation during this time, and our program helps transport patients to and from treatment using Uber, where they were the only person in the vehicle and that felt safer to them. So we were really working hard to make sure that we were getting patients to and from their treatments for cancer during this time.
So, Long Islanders have a lot of choices for treatment, and that's probably related to the large volume of people diagnosed. Now, some choose community oncology and others choose university practices like Stony Brook Hospital. But Dr. Nori, can you explain the differences between the two?
There are two, I would say, settings that patients can receive their cancer care. One is in what we call the university setting. That's typically where most of us do our training. I trained in a university program. So a big university program is attached to a large hospital with a very strong academic affiliation. And university centers have access to a lot of resources, but oftentimes can feel quite large, overwhelming, and uncomfortable for some patients. So after training in a big university setting, I opted to transition to a community practice, which provides, in my opinion, very personalized, very comfortable, and very much closer to home care, if you will. When I think there's a misconception that if you're in community practice, you have no affiliations with university practices. That is not true. New York Cancer and Blood, I think, has paved the way. We have strong affiliations with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Stony Brook University Hospital. We send our patients for clinical trials. It's really, I think both settings are very beneficial to patients. It just depends on what the patient is looking for. If they're looking to get care close to home, not travel far, see the same doctor, have a super close relationship with their doctor, then they choose New York Cancer and Blood. There's not a right or wrong. It just depends on what fits for the patients.
Do you think that once the pandemic hit, that the relationship between the two changed?
Absolutely. So, I thought it was, such an amazing, situation when our colleagues from a big university center reached out to us and said, we can't give our patients the life-saving infusions that they need. Will you, New York Cancer and Blood specialists, step in, allow our patients to come to your infusion centers that are safe, open, operating, we extended our office hours. Anybody who's worked with New York Cancer, Nancy knows, we were working till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, keeping our infusion centers open so patients could be brought in a few at a time and nobody was jammed together. And our university partners reached out to us and said, please help us take care of our patients. And we took care of them. And once the university, setting opened up, we got them right back to their doctors and right back to where they belonged.
Do you think the new bond that you've created, do you think that'll continue now post-pandemic? Knock on wood, post-pandemic?
Absolutely. I'm knocking on wood too. What an amazing experience it was to talk to other oncologists who, I may never have gotten on the phone with, sharing patients, sharing responsibility, true collaboration, and not a sense of you're that practice, I'm this practice. It was truly a, just wonderful, wonderful community feeling. Patients were grateful. I had one, patient who I can't stop thinking about. And she said to me, she goes, you always came to the infusion center and said hi to me. I'm not your patient, but you took such good care of me. And I would joke around with her and I would say, I'm just babysitting you for a little bit, but I like it. I'm not going to send you back. But it was a wonderful experience.
Jerry, is there anything you'd like to add or thoughts on?
I agree 100%. So many of our people that come to us, they're happy and love their settings of seeing privately. A lot of doctors have offices in hospitals, and so that's where they were seen, and then they go into the infusion center in the hospital. When the pandemic came, their fear of going into a hospital to get treated or just to be seen, they kind of pulled back. So luckily, most of them had practices that had situations outside the hospitals. They prefer to be seen outside the hospital. We didn't have major because they were at least allowed to be seen outside the hospital. But most of them had they felt good seeing their own doctor. You have that comfort zone. Very hard to start in the middle of treatment with someone new because they don't have a place for you to go. There's enough places we're fortunate that work together, and because we work with all of the hospitals, we're able to have that access.
Nancy, how did New York Cancer Foundation help patients during the height of COVID? Because people needed a lot of help and they turned to you, and you were kind of given this deck of cards that you didn't know how to play. So what happened at that point?
It definitely was, as Dr. Nouri said, uncharted waters. I've been a not-for-profit almost 20 years and have never experienced anything like this. Even with getting, applicants' documentation to us, we would sometimes drive to their house to have them put it outside on the doorstep so that we could pick it up and get it because they didn't want to leave their homes. Or, like I said, delivering meals and leaving it on the front doorstep, which is kind of outside the guidelines of what we do as an organization. But when the patients needed it, we were able to make it happen. I think that the most important thing was that where we really felt that they needed more help than ever, we were able to go to our board of directors and say, we have a special case here, or, this person really needs a grocery food card. Can we make this happen? And the board, of course, said, yes, let's help these people to the best of our ability. And now that is actually something that we do and will continue to do for patients in need, is to provide those grocery store gift cards. In addition to paying, their expenses for them while they're in treatment. So I think just really identifying the areas of need and trying to address those as best we could was important during this time.
I'm talking about adjustment. Jerry, I feel like at Hewlett House, it's about being in person and the community groups working face to face. And you guys, obviously, you could not do that, and everything had to turn virtual. What do you think was the biggest challenge at that time, and now that you're facing today?
Oh, I tell you, I think the virtual, even though thank goodness we had it, was tough because when you're going through treatment, when you're a cancer patient, and we are all about hugs. And
Mhm.
so, you know, we started to get in a lot of stuffed animals, and we would send them to the different houses where the virtual was taking place so that they had something to hold on to. Some people need that. Um, it was tough because people couldn't wait to get out. At least we could see each other, but there was still not that being together, that face to face, that touching. And I think that is very important when you're dealing with these kind of things that, um, just reaching out to somebody and holding a hand. It's very, very important. They all kind of miss that. We have an advanced cancer support group that is still on virtual because they're afraid to really come out and be in the same room, even when it's beautiful out, to be outside. That fear
Mhm.
is, and I can understand that. But we have started to reopen. People are now coming in, um, and it's tough. I could see them, where they had their spaces on the couch or the chairs. They kind of move over so there's still enough room. We've worked it out. And like I say, those little we have our pet therapy, and some of our dog goes to certain houses because they need that feeling of a hug and being with someone else. And while you're looking at someone on a screen, there's something that you still can't reach and get out to. And lots of times people just look at one another and they understand. Um, crying, laughing, it's all part of our illness and getting onto recovery. And sometimes it's hard when you're on a screen and you have 20 minutes or 35 minutes to really let it all out. But we're working it out. We're doing the best we can, and we are always there to outreach. And now when we get on the screen, they pick up their little teddy bear or their little lamb, and everybody gives a hug. And it sounds silly and childish, but it means something.
We talk a lot about early detection, and I feel you always hear that. You have to go to your annual checkups, and you have to find it early. And I can tell you from personal experience that my mother-in-law did not go for her annual checkups, and by the time they detected it, it was very late in the game. And then when COVID hit, she was scared to leave and scared to go to her doctor's appointments, and we lost her last May. And it kills me because I feel that if she just would have went when she was supposed to, that we could she could still be here to see her grandchildren grow up. So, do you think that COVID has even made early detection worse because more people are putting off those appointments? What are your thoughts? I guess, Jerry, let's start with you on that.
I do. I think that people do put them off. There's a lot of fears out there. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lack of communication. One day, be treated, go for your vaccine, don't go for your vaccine, wear your mask, don't wear your mask, don't go into places where people are not vaccinated. And it also becomes an easy excuse. I will, I'll be okay. I'll get better. I'll call. Maybe I know somebody to see what this is. Maybe it's really not that. And I think by knowing your history, knowing your situation, sometimes it gives you a good little push. And being able to talk to someone, being able to pick up a phone and say, listen, I was there. I was in that place. You need to go. It's very, very important. You can't wait. So it's probably nothing. Maybe it's something, and if it is, we have to take care of it. But we won't know until that point. We don't want it to be too. You don't want it to be too late. There is that fear, and I could certainly understand it.
Nancy, what do you think?
I mean, I agree. We kind of see people after they're diagnosed, but the common denominator is definitely the fear factor. And so I think, it's just been very heightened during COVID, heightened by financial stress, heightened by so many different factors. So I completely agree with Jerry.
And Dr. Nori, from like a medical point of view, have you seen numbers go up from people like late stages during COVID and everything?
Yeah, great question, and I'm so sorry about your loss, Anna. It's such a you have such a I think a personal perspective on this topic, and what you just said, I mean, mirrors so many stories of so many families that have come to me to discuss like what happened to their aunt or their mother, and I couldn't agree more. And thankfully, um, I would say there was not a major increase in the number of patients that were diagnosed very late, like God forbid, stage 4. But we did see an increase in the number of women who, an increase from, typically patients are diagnosed with early stage, such as DCIS or stage 1. We did see more lymph node positive disease, and that was something we discussed in all of our conferences, tumor boards, and we did see an uptick in patients being diagnosed slightly later. Thankfully, those are still cancers that we can intervene on, act on, and provide meaningful outcomes for. One, I think, very poignant story that a family member shared with me was their mother who was found to have a palpable mass. She was in a nursing home. So, as you can imagine, these nursing homes were on major lockdown, and family members couldn't get in to advocate for their family members, and patients couldn't get out. And it was just this horrific story of this, longtime patient of mine whose mother developed a breast mass, and it grew. And she couldn't get evaluations for it. Everything was shut down, and she eventually succumbed to stage 4 disease, and it was just devastating because I think there could have been so much more we could have done for her, and maybe it still would have led to her demise, but perhaps we could have given her more time with quality with her family. And unfortunately, again, the family could not even get into the nursing home to mourn her when she was eventually placed on hospice. Just a very difficult time.
Yeah. All right. But that aside, there are certainly some heroes that go unrecognized. And the caregivers that day in and day out throughout the pandemic were there. And to highlight all the incredible work they do, we're hosting a celebration of caregivers at radioforacure.com. And it's a gallery full of faces of local caregivers, all their stories. But Nancy, let's start with you on this. How has COVID affected the caregiver community?
So again, I feel that the stress has affected the entire family. Certainly, when there's financial stress, it affects the entire family. But on a positive note, I definitely see that the caregivers have really become true advocates for patients. Their bond is definitely, stronger than ever. I know even in my family, for my mom, it's become, the bond is a lot stronger. I think because we are valuing things differently than we did pre-COVID. I think we kind of look at things through a different lens now. And, we're grateful that we can go to an appointment with our loved one and be there with them at this point where, for so long that couldn't happen. And, we definitely work with the entire family when we have a patient come to us. So the caregivers are a huge part of that situation for us. So I think the positive side is that the bonds are even closer than they were before, just because we're all so grateful.
And Jerry, is there anything you'd like to add about the changes that came along for the caregivers and what they had to pivot and what they had to do?
Yeah, I agree with Nancy, and I think that we have a psychologist that comes in once a week, and sometimes when we see, stress, we all know is the worst thing in the world for cancer, but we live under this pandemic and so much, and I think to have someone to talk to is really important. To just let it all out is important. It's hard when you're a caregiver. Um, there's all ways of looking at caregivers. I'm a caregiver at home as well as what I do for work, and I find it's very difficult with this pandemic to separate the two because you really have to be on target without realizing it all the time. You watch what you say and how you feel, and someone can look at you and say, are you really worried about this? Or, it's really such a difficult time, I think. But being there for someone is very, very important.
Yeah. Dr. Nori, what do you think are the major takeaways? Like as a community, the healthcare system, like we've learned a lot during the 19 months that we've just gone through, that things are different, things are changing. What do you think are the things that are most important that we should take going forward?
Oh my, there's so many amazing things I think we learned during this whole process. And I think the number one thing I can say is education, stopping the fear, um, propagating scientific data, giving patients knowledge, giving them the tools to make good decisions. So education. And the other thing I would say is, really kind of coming together as a community and, working together and getting these patients in for screening, working together, extending hours, helping everyone really, really get back on track. But just educating our patients is so incredibly important, whether that's a doctor to patient conversation, community outreach. I mean, we're heading into Breast Cancer Awareness Month, it's just all about building awareness and educating.
Sherry, what do you think? Major takeaways from the last year and a half and everything that's happened. What can we do better going forward?
Well, I know it's hard, but I think our outreach has to be much broader. I think we need to understand and get people to understand a little more that they can be freer in what they have to say, and that we need to get the education and the knowledge, even looking at genetics and things that give them more power. I think that when you have an illness or you could just go so far, giving people some power to be able to help themselves is very strong emotionally, and it helps in a lot of places. And people, I wish there was an easier way of getting the phone numbers out to people to know where they could call, where they could get help, even emotionally, mentally, a question. So many run to those computers and they read things that have nothing to do with their particular disease. Or where do I find this good doctor? What do I do? I mean, that's something that I think we really need to do. There's just so much we can do about this pandemic, and just listen to the scientists. For me, talk to your doctors. So important. Talk to your doctor. Ask those questions.
Nancy, from your point of view, what do you think?
I would say that, well, one of the takeaways, watching the medical staff, the clinical team, has really been amazing. Go above and beyond, putting themselves in harm's way to take care of their patients because cancer really doesn't take a break. And our doctors like Dr. Nori and the wonderful staff at New York Cancer and Blood, they never stopped. And they really, were working extra long hours. And it was really amazing to watch them come together. The other thing that I saw that I would love to see that it already happened and can continue to happen is how our communities mobilize to help people who were really in need. And I think that it took a pandemic. I mean, we see it every now and then, but we saw it on a very large canvas throughout the pandemic. And, how can we continue to do that? And how can we get to people who can't leave their homes or who can't work? And what could we do within our own networks to help people who are really in need like this, and not just cancer patients, but globally, how can we really help one another?
I was saying, it's funny you bring that up because I'm in media. So every day we get all these news stories every single day. And there were so many beautiful stories of help and community that came out every single day through the pandemic. And I find that even like in tragedy times, that's when you see the shining light of people come through so much. And if we could only keep that, in non-pandemic times, in non-tragedy times, everything would be kind of better. The world right now is in a very strange, divisive place when it comes to vaccines. Let's be honest. It seems like you're on one side of the fence or the other, and we don't know what to believe. And how does that translate to the healthcare community? How do you handle that? How does that go hand in hand with breast cancer patients? Dr. Nori, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it goes back to educating patients. So, for our cancer patients, we are advocating vaccination. Our patients fall into the highest risk, most immunocompromised, patient population. Um, Kind of on a more elementary note, one of the things that has to do with vaccination in breast cancer patients is we did see a tremendous increase in the number of swollen lymph nodes that we detected on breast imaging. So just like an easy point, most of my patients know this already. If they do opt to get a vaccine, we ask them to wait about 4 to 6 weeks before they do their routine screening imaging. So that's just a small point I like to make. And then in general, I mean, I think we don't have to make, vaccination so divisive. I think, again, educate our patients, talk to them about, the risks and benefits, and really just trying to, I always say to my patients, I want you to make the decision. I just want to give you the tools that are going to help you make the right decision for you.
But you haven't seen anything about, for breast cancer patients, the efficacy of the vaccine besides the lymph nodes and all that. That's really been it.
That's been the major side effect, and I think that's something important as a breast oncologist, a breast radiologist, and a patient. If you're getting the vaccine, you make sure you tell your radiologist that you had your vaccination. Give them a timeline. Just with personal experience, I went in for my screening this year, and one of the first screening questions the team asked me is, when did you get your COVID vaccine? What arm? And they made, careful, detailed notes, and cleared me to go ahead and have my screening mammogram, because I was, more than several months out from my vaccine.
So, and even like side effects, a lot of people report having, after the second dose, having side effects. Or I had Johnson and Johnson, and I had side effects after the first shot. So, have you seen anything that's different with breast cancer patients?
No, actually, I haven't. Generally speaking, most of my patients have tolerated the vaccination very, very well. I'm not a breast cancer patient, but I got my vaccination. I had typical, side effects of chills and muscle pains, but nothing that lasted, more than a few hours. And I would say even my patients who are on chemo, on endocrine therapy, and again, I'm speaking for my patient population. I'm not speaking, globally about all breast cancer patients. My patients have tolerated very well. And, one of the most important things I also, tell my patients is, when you do go for your screening mammogram, the reason why we want to tell our radiologist what side we had the vaccination on is because the vaccine typically will cause localized swelling of the lymph nodes. So if you get your vaccine in the left arm, for example, you could have swollen lymph nodes in the left armpit, or we call it the axilla. So for example, let's say you get your vaccine in the left arm, but you have swollen lymph nodes in the right. It's unlikely that that will be related to the vaccine, but just something to be aware of.
That makes a lot of sense. Jerry, what do you suggest for your patients in regards to the vaccine at the Hewlett House?
Well, I've had Pfizer, I had my vaccines, and I had the booster. And I just feel that anything that we can do to help stop this horrible pandemic and this virus, we need to do. We need to protect ourselves as well as our families. I did call my doctor and discuss the booster, even though I had already made up my mind, but I thought it was important to get his opinion. And I think those things are important. I look back at, our kids growing up when they had smallpox and all these different kind of vaccines, and We knew nothing about that at the time, but yes, it was important to get it. My doctors have asked me to, when I talk about that, to encourage people, especially patients, to get their vaccines. And I do it because I believe in it. I think it's important. Um, you have the flu shot. Some of us have side effects for a little bit, a day or so, and after that, it's over. I think it's proven, masks have certainly proven a fact that there were less colds and less, things like that going on. Um, and I do worry about some of the people out there that have just said, I'm not getting vaccine, I don't want it. And I'm frightened for those that have taken the time to get it, to worry about our children and, this thing coming, that are not doing it. You just have to do the best you can and encourage it. And for us as a healthcare situation, um, no one can come into Hewlett House unless they have had their vaccine. Um, if we have to meet somebody outside, we'll do that. I don't want to turn anyone away. We'll talk on the phone. But I think to protect other patients, we have to do that. It's very important.
Nancy, I'd like to start with you. Do you have any final thoughts about breast cancer and the time of the pandemic and everything that's happened over the 19 months and what you'd like to share going forward?
Just that the New York Cancer Foundation is a resource that is here for not only breast cancer patients, but any cancer patient from any oncology practice, from Manhattan to Montauk. If a patient is in current treatment for cancer and they meet the guidelines for our foundation, we are here to help alleviate some of that stress for them. We want to be a resource. We want to help you get to and from your treatments. We want people to reach out to us. And, anything that we can do to help that journey be a little bit easier, we want to be involved in that process for them.
Jerry, final thoughts?
Yeah, the same thing. I think for us, we're a community learning resource center for all cancer. And I think it's important that we're able to help people with insurance issues, with other issues that they may not realize they even have with their families, getting transportation, um, giving them where they might live closer to facilities that can help out. Um, those are the important. We need to be there to answer the questions and to inform as much as we can. And one of the things I know we didn't cover, but I think genetics is so important for people to know about and understand who they are and their history and what genetic testing is. So that's something that I think that I'm sure the oncologists can touch on, but I think that's something that's really, really important.
Dr. Nori?
First of all, I think that this was just such a great discussion. And I think that what I learned from this whole thing is, first of all, it's ongoing. So we're still, dealing with the ramifications and the long-term consequences of this global pandemic. But I'm so incredibly proud of my colleagues in surgery, radiology, radiation oncology, our colleagues in places like Jerry's organization, Mondays at Racine, Nancy. I mean, as a community, we've tied ourselves together. We're helping patients. We're committed to getting everyone back on track. I'm just so incredibly proud of the whole oncology community. I'm so proud of patients for returning back to their visits, coming back in for screenings, coming back in for breast examinations. I, over the last few months, have seen so many women come back to the office and, just get back into the swing of things, get back into their screening, monitoring their bone health, just taking great care of themselves. Just so incredibly happy.
It's important to keep talking, keep pushing for change, keep researching, keep preparing so we can continue the fight. Thank you to Nicolak Paving Stones for being our partners on such an important topic. And thank you so much, Dr. Yelda Nori, Jerry Barish, Nancy Viteretti for being a part of this discussion, for your tireless efforts in the fight against breast cancer. Honestly, what you ladies do is incredibly valuable and important, and I'm sure our community joins me when we say thank you for thinking of them and putting yourselves out every single day to help others. And for more of our speaker series, please head to radioforacure.com. I'm Anna Zapp from Walk 97.5. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the New York Cancer and Blood Specialist Radio for a Cure speaker series, Breast Cancer in the Time of COVID, presented by Nicolak Paving Stones. For more episodes in this series, visit radioforacure.com.